I just want to put this into short context. My mother fucked up. My mother moved from WA to Brisbane, and our first port of call was Woolloongabba, then eventually we lived at Wacol. And then she chose to move to Inala, and a mother allowed her 11, 12-year-old boy to be mixed up in a pedophile ring, to actually be groomed for a pedophile ring. And basically what's happened is, as this is happening, of course, if the authorities, that's the Queensland government, is doing their job, they and the federal government, they would be watching and they would be knowing this would be happening. What's happened is, in a short context, my mother caught me when I was a little boy. I was only probably 11 or 12 with another kid. We were experimenting on the back lawn. We were just kids. She yelled at me. She told me to come inside. She picked up a lump of 4B2, tipped up the bed, but in the corner of my eye now, I know there were two people standing at the window. Those two people, believe it or not, they were very bad people, because what they were involved in, they should be in jail for. But they were people that were part of a pedophile ring. That night my mother went to sleep, and we all went to sleep, and suddenly a person got into my mother's house. She was asleep, and these people walked into the house. The house was completely locked up, and they stood over her bed and said, "Barbara!" And she wouldn't wake. And they said to her name again, "Barbara!" And she woke. She startled, and it obviously woke Morris up, because he woke up and said, "What the fuck's going on here?" And he must have been startled himself. So what happened is, this man said to Barbara, "You touch Cameron again, or do anything to him ever again, we will kill you. Have you got it? You touch Cameron or do anything to him, we will kill you." They walked out of the house apparently. In their casual thing, they just walked out of the house like they lived there. And Morris ran down the road after them and chased them. Luckily, today that I'm aware of, I know who those people were. I have worked with these people. Actually worked against these people for the Queensland government. Now, what happened was, my mother allowed me to get involved in some very, very serious shit at the age of 11 and 12 and 13. But what happened is, my mother allowed me to eventually become a street kid, and basically I became a street kid. I was approached by two Queensland police officers, plain clothes, in Brisbane City. "Cameron, how would you like to come and work for the Queensland Police, because if you keep doing what you're doing with these pedophile rings, you're going to end up dead?" I said, "Sure, I'll come. I might be interested. Yeah, sure, I'll think." They said, "Alright, at midnight tonight you will meet outside of the old Roma Street Police Headquarters," because there's a new Roma Street Police Headquarters, "and here's a police cap, put it on if you are interested." I was curious, so I went and did it. Now I stood there, and these two officers came out. I know they were officers, in the plain clothes that they were in that day, and they said, "Right, okay, you're obviously keen, you want to get involved." And they took me into police headquarters, and I met an Inspector Williams and an Inspector McCaw. Inspector Williams and Inspector McCaw said, "Right, you seriously want to get involved, Cameron?" I said, "Well, I've got nothing to lose, Inspector McCaw, Inspector Williams." They were sitting at one end of the table and I was sitting at the other end of the table, and it was a little bit dark, but I could identify they were inspectors. I knew who they were. So anyway, they said, "Well, this is the first day, and this is the first day I've started your training." The one thing they did ask me, they said, "Are you scared of guns?" I said, "What do you mean?" And they chucked a gun across the table and said, "One thing you will learn, Cameron, is you have to learn to use this if you want to live." And I said, "Alright." So the next day I started my training. I was trained and instructed by police instructors that train intelligence officers in intelligence operations and operations called special ops and stuff like that. And there was one stage where I got involved with a operation with a cargo carrier offshore. And what happened was, I was to be involved in this operation to the point that there was drug shipments coming in on a cargo carrier. This was sort of hushed by the media, but I was involved in this operations. Part of my involvement was also to be introduced for the first time. I walked into a pub and I sat there, ordered a beer. I had a briefcase on me, and that briefcase was full of cocaine. There's a gentleman sitting next to me. He obviously was from a drug cartel, and he had a briefcase full of money. What happened was, it went wrong. He got paranoid. He was off his head, obviously on coke, on angel dust, cocaine, whatever you want to bloody call it. He went off his head and started threatening me and said, "You're a fucking dog, and you're a copper," and all the rest of it. We ended up in the courtyard. This whole pub was surrounded by police. I looked up at the marksman. He said, "No, you deal with it." He pulled his gun. I pulled my gun. It's self-defense. Either he was going to kill me or I was going to kill him. Part of my involvement was that I never ever was put on any documents, and I was never stated. So it wasn't me that day that was there. It was actually a Sergeant John, or whatever you want to call him. I wasn't there. Somebody else would have written the documents for me. And so at the end of the day, I never ever was going to go to court, and I was never ever going to be involved. I think it's quite funny as an initiation into the job that I was doing to be put through what I did. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is, it was either me or him. So anyway, after that, I was told to go to the Hilton in Brisbane, and there were two drug cartels in the Hilton, and I was to somewhat play one against the other, because obviously at this time there was a drug shipment off the east coast of Australia that had a large amount of drugs which the government knew about, and there was a intelligence operation going on about that, plus the two drug cartels that were involved. Look, at the end of the day, enough is enough. You do not use a juvenile for the purposes of to catch criminals. You do not use a juvenile in this way. But what I've learnt out of bad reasons, I use for good reasons. Yes, I was trained as an intelligence operation. Eventually I was introduced to the federal government agents, and I was introduced into all sorts of wonderful things, getting involved in all sorts of investigations. I also had a lot of involvement with a lot of politicians, and for instance, I will talk about how I came across and understood clearly what a Prime Minister of Australia's job is, and how much stress and strain is put on a Prime Minister. But a little story will go, and I will leave it here, and I will talk about the ex-Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister Bob Hawke, how I accidentally, because I was eavesdropping on his door, and I was in Canberra, because obviously I eventually had the trust, and I had clearance, an off-clearance limit to go wherever. I had jobs to do, and I did my job. But I'll talk about Mr. Bob Hawke in 2 secs.